website at russiatoday.ru. In a moment, though, the highlights of President Putin's speech at the International Security Conference in the German city of Munich. Stay with us.
The format of the conference gives me an opportunity to do without excessive politeness and the need to speak in rounded, pleasant, but empty diplomatic cliches. This format allows me to tell you what I really think about the problems of international security. And if my thoughts would seem to my colleagues excessively acute or not accurate enough, please, I would like to apologize. It's just a conference, and I hope Mr. Telchik will not switch on the red light. And as any war, Cold War has left the unexploded munitions, to figuratively speaking. I mean the ideological stereotypes, double standards, and other cliches of bloc-type mentality. The unipolar world that was suggested after the Cold War also did not materialize. The history of mankind knows periods of unipolar state and the strive for world domination. But what is unipolar world? No matter how much we beautify this term, in the final analysis, in practice, it means only one. It is one single center of power, one single center of force, one single center of decision-making. This is a world of one master, one sovereign. And in the final analysis, this is fatal not only for all those who are within the framework of that system, but also for the sovereign himself, because it destroys it from within. It has nothing in common with democracy, of course, because democracy, as is known, is the power of the majority, taking into account the opinion of the minority. Unilateral, illegitimate actions have not managed to resolve any single problem. Moreover, they became a generator of new human tragedies and hotbeds of tension. Judge for yourself. The wars, local and regional conflicts are more in number. Mr. Telchik very softly reminded us of that. And the people who perish in these conflicts are more in number, not less. Much more. Much more. Today, we are witnessing almost uncontained hyper-use of force in international relations, military force. The forces that bring us to the abyss of one conflict after another, and we don't have enough force to resolve any comprehensive decision. So their political solution is becoming impossible. We see more and more ignoring of the basic principles of international law. Moreover, some rules and the entire system of one state, and primarily the United States, has overstepped its national borders, and in every area, in economy, in politics, in humanitarian, are imposed by one state. Who may like that? In international affairs, more and more often we see a wish to resolve this or that question proceeding from political expedience here, based on current conditions. And this is very dangerous. It leads to the situation when nobody feels is insecurity. Nobody feels secure anymore, because nobody can hide behind the international law as behind a stone wall. Of course, such policy is a catalyst of the arms race. The domination of the factor of force is nourishing the thrust of countries to get weapons of mass destruction. Today, when the international landscape is changing so quickly, it is changing because of dynamic development of a number of states and regions. Madam Federal Chancellor has mentioned it. The aggregate GDP of India and China is more than that of the United States. And calculated GDP of the Brazil, Russia, India, and China is more than GDP of the European Union. And according to expert assessment, in the future, this gap will only grow. There is no reason to doubt that economic potential of new centers of world growth can be converted into political influence and will consolidate multipolarity. In this connection, the role of multilateral diplomacy is seriously growing. Openness, transparency, and the predictability of the policy have no alternative. The use of force should be an exclusive measure, just as the capital punishment in the legal systems of some of the states. Today, however, we are witnessing a situation when the countries where the use of capital punishment is prohibited, even when it concerns murderers and other dangerous criminals. Nevertheless, these countries easily participate in military operations which can hardly be called legitimate. But during these conflicts, hundreds, thousands of people are dying. At the same time, the question arises, should we be witnessing the development of internal conflicts in various countries, the actions of authoritarian regimes, of tyrants, the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction? Of course not. Of course we should not be indifferent. Of course not. But do we have the means to counter these threats? Yes, we do. No doubt about it. Suffice it to remember the recent history. There was a democratic shift, peaceful shift to democracy in our countries. There was a peaceful transformation of the Soviet regime. And what kind of regime it was? A huge number of weapons, including nuclear weapons. Why then now, at every opportunity, we have to bomb and shoot? Is it true that when there is lack of threat of mutual destruction, we don't have political culture, respect for the values of democracy and law? I'm convinced the only mechanism of decision-making to use military force as a last resort can be the Charter of United Nations only. And in this connection, I did not understand what was said just recently by our colleague, the Minister of Defense of Italy. Maybe he was not accurate enough, but what I heard, he said that a legitimate decision can only be made in the NATO or in the European Union or the United Nations. If you really think so, then we have different opinion, judgment, or maybe it's a misunderstanding. The legitimate use of force cannot be only done within the framework of the United Nations. It should not be, and the United Nations cannot be replaced by NATO or the European Union. And when the United Nations will realistically unite the international community that can react to the events in individual countries, when we get rid of the attempts to ignore international law, the situation will be changed. Otherwise, the situation will find itself in an impasse, and the grave mistakes will grow in number. And it is important to preserve stability in international and legal basis of disarmament, and to ensure continuity of the process of reducing nuclear weapons. We have agreed with the United States on cutting down our nuclear potentials on strategic carriers. down to 1,700, 2,200 nuclear charges by the 31st December 2012. Russia is planning to strictly observe these commitments. We hope that our partners will also act in a transparent manner and will not put aside for a rainy day a few hundred nuclear charges. And if today the new Secretary of Defense of the United States tells us that the United States will not hide these charges in their storage facilities under the pillow, that would be a great achievement. We cannot accept the appearance of new destabilizing high-tech types of weapons. I'm not talking about the measures to prevent new spheres of confrontation, especially in the space. The Star Wars, as is known, is not fantasy, it's reality. Even in the mid-80s, our American partners have intercepted their own satellite. Militarization of space, in the opinion of Russia, can provoke unpredictable consequences for the world community, not less than the beginning of the nuclear era. And we have, on several occasions, taken the initiatives at unacceptability of using arms in space. Today we have drafted a treaty to prevent the placement of weapons in space. It will be sent to our partners as an official proposal in the near future. Let us work on this question together. Being here in Germany, I cannot fail but mention the crisis of the Treaty on Conventional Forces in Europe. The adapted treaty on these forces was signed in 1999. It took into account the new geopolitical reality, the elimination of the Warsaw Treaty. 7 years have elapsed from that, and only 4 countries have ratified this treaty, including Russian Federation. The countries of NATO openly declared that they will not ratify the treaty, including the provisions on flank restrictions of deploying of forces in the flanks until Russia withdraws its bases from Georgia and Moldova. And our forces are being withdrawn from Georgia. We have resolved those questions. In Moldova, there is a group of 1,500 servicemen who are guarding the storage facility of munitions and are engaged in peacekeeping operations. Together with Mr. Solana, we are discussing this problem. He is aware of our position. We are prepared to work on that score. Now, what is happening at the same time? At the same time, in Bulgaria and Romania, there are the so-called light American forward bases of 5,000 servicemen each. It turns out that NATO is bringing its advanced forces to our state borders. And we, by strictly abiding by the treaty, do not react to these forces in any way. It is evident that the process of NATO expansion has nothing to do with the modernization of the alliance and the provision of security in Europe. On the contrary, it's a serious factor that reducing the level of mutual trust. And we have the right to ask against whom this expansion is aimed. And what happened to the assurances that were provided by the Western partners after the disbandment of the Warsaw Treaty? We unambiguously support the consolidation of the regime of non-proliferation. The existing international basis provides for the technology to be used for peaceful purposes, and many countries want to create their own nuclear energy sector as a basis for their energy independence. But we also understand that this technology can be rapidly transformed in order to produce weapon-grade materials. This is the cause of serious international concern and tension. A vivid example is the situation with the Iranian nuclear program. If international community does not work out a sensible peaceful solution of this conflict of interest, the world will continue to be shaken by destabilizing crisis. Because such threshold countries are more in number than just Iran. We are aware of that. We'll be constantly confronted with the threat of proliferation of the weapons of mass destruction. Last year, Russia came out with the initiative of creating multinational centers to enrich uranium. We are open to the idea of establishing such centers not only in Russia, but also in other countries on a legitimate basis. The states that want to develop nuclear energy sector could have a guaranteed supply of fuel through the direct participation in the work of such centers under the strict control of IAEA. In the energy sphere, Russia is aiming at establishing single for all the market principles and transparent conditions. It is clear that the price of energy should be determined by the market and not become the object of political speculation and economic pressure. We are open for cooperation. Foreign companies are taking part in the development of large-scale energy projects. According to the estimates, that up to 26% of the oil extraction in Russia, just saying 26%, is done by foreign capital. Just try to quote the example of such broad participation of Russian business in the key sectors of West European economies. There are no examples like that. There are no examples like that. I would like to remind you about the ratio of investment from Russia and coming to Russia. It is 15-1. This is a vivid example of openness and stability of the Russian economy. Economic security is an area where everybody should have the same principles. We are prepared to compete honestly. One more important subject, which is directly influencing global security. Today, a lot is said about countering poverty. What is happening here in reality? On the one hand, the programs of assistance to the most poor countries of the world, large financial resources are being allocated. But to be honest, and many people are aware of this, these resources should be used by the companies of the donor countries. And on the other hand, in the developed countries, there are subsidies in agriculture. The access to high-tech technology is restricted for others. Let us call things by their proper names. It turns out that, by one hand, we are distributing charity aid, and by the other, we are not only conserving economic backwardness, but also trying to gather profits. Of course, the leading countries of the world should be aware of this threat and should build a more democratic and just system of economic relations in the world, a system that gives everyone a chance and the possibility to develop. Speaking at the conference of the questions of security, we cannot avoid the subject of the activity of the Organization on Security and Cooperation in Europe. As is known, it has been created to review all, I would emphasize, all aspects of security, military, political, economic, humanitarian, in their interconnection. Today, what do we witness in reality? We see that the balance has been destroyed. OSCE, their attempts to turn OSCE into a vulgar instrument of ensuring foreign policy interests of one country. For this task, the bureaucratic apparatus of OSCE has been reformed. The procedure of making decisions has also been tailored to that effect. And the use of the so-called non-governmental organizations. Formally, they are independent, but they are financed and controlled. According to the basic documents in the humanitarian area, OSCE is called to provide the member participating countries, at their request, help in ensuring human rights. It's an important task. We support it, but this doesn't mean that there should be interference into internal affairs. All the more so the country decisions should be imposed on how to develop and to live. This interference is not instrumental in creating genuinely democratic states. We hope that OSCE will be guided by their direct tasks and build its relations with sovereign countries on the basis of respect, trust and transparency.